movement. And the first Earth Day in 1970 shaped me in my teenage years. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, began the movement to respond to the damage humanity was doing to our precious planet with a flurry of laws passed to begin to protect endangered species, clean up our air, rivers, waterways, deal with the public health issues like seatbelts, smoking in public places, and stop exposing people to carcinogens and toxic chemicals. This is when people started recycling and reusing to reduce all the waste we were creating. Eating patterns began changing too. Consume less or no meat or vegetables, and scientific evidence proved that the vegan diet was healthy and nutritious even without consuming animal products. This growing respect for the fragility of the planet encouraged me to recognize the integrity of the earth. The well-being of what was below my feet was more important than extracting raw materials from it, using up the nutrients in the soil for crops, only to be partially replenished with synthetic fertilizers, and finally treating valleys and oceans as garbage dumps and sewers. All this abuse of our great mother just to manufacture products to temporarily stimulate pleasant sensations, states of consciousness, and avoid unpleasantness. The quality of life of much of the Western world is measured by gross domestic product. The constant growth in manufacturing consumption of material wealth is how our society measures happiness. The more stuff we have, the happier we are, at least measuring gross domestic product. I suspect we all know GDP growth onward and upward forever is unsatisfactory, destined to fail. Our children cannot be as wealthy as their parents, and if they're maybe more wealthy, they may not be able to have the 2 cars, the suburban McMansion, the vacation home, the boat, the big nest egg for retirement, send their children to Ivy League schools. Living the American dream is all about success that includes significant material wealth. Yet for the entire world to attain such wealth, we need another couple of planets to extract everything needed and probably drive a whole bunch of species to extinction on those other planets too. So I grew up with this realization that material wealth wasn't the way to happiness. I watched college students older than me joining communes, taking drugs, and dropping out of the rat race. They were discovering swamis, gurus, and expanding their minds, looking for other ways to find happiness than becoming a corporate suit or a suburban housewife. That exploration of consciousness was all winding down when I showed up in California in 1977 to join the revolution. Just as my baby boomer elders were settling down, getting jobs, and starting families. The microcomputer boom, however, was taking off in 1981. And I was in the right place at the right time for that revolution. While I was making good money helping to manufacture those microcomputers, I discovered Theravada Buddhism. This is the orthodox form, the Buddhism of the elders, is what that means, as taught by the Buddha himself. the monks who practiced these original teachings of the Dharma for the last 2,500 years in an unbroken lineage also preserved the community of practice he organized that he called the Sangha. Much as I liked and found great benefit from the meditation methods that those monks taught, I was also fascinated by their monastic community. To become a monk, one gives up all one's possessions. The monks wear only an unfinished length of cloth that is given to them carefully draped as a robe. Besides their robe, the second primary possession is a bowl for food. The monk begs for food every morning using that bowl, eating one meal a day and nothing after noon. They give away any food they can't eat that day, except for a few personal care items and medicine. They live without personal possessions. Yet these monks live a very happy life, happier than most of their villagers who support them. They serve those villagers through the rites and rituals, as well as education. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement that works very well for the villagers and for the monastics. The training that I received that emphasized mindfulness has been extremely valuable to me. I've gotten great benefit and peace of mind from practicing mindfulness for the last 40 years. But the package it comes in hasn't been that appealing to many Unitarian Universalists, maybe most. There aren't a lot of UUs that get super excited about sitting and walking meditation retreats in complete silence over a 10-day period. Starting each day before dawn and continuing until late at night, breaks for some meals and an optional maybe nap in the afternoon. The lifestyle of begging for food or giving up all one's worldly possessions just doesn't appeal or make much sense to the average Western householder with a spouse or children, a job. So having drawn so much value from Buddhism, Buddhist meditation practice and philosophy, I've had some sadness and frustration over the years of not being able to integrate it more into Unitarian Universalist ministry. That might be changing a bit, however, having recently rediscovered Stoicism. This ancient Greek philosophy has had a bit of a resurgence in the 21st century. Silicon Valley rationalists, effective altruists, and atheists have found Stoicism can be both practical and meaningful for their lives without the need for personal deity. Stoicism offers a framework for moral and emotional development grounded in reason, kind of secular spirituality. In a world of information overload, social fragmentation, and constant crises, Stoicism's calm, detached perspective feels like psychological armor. It's a tool set for living sanely in an age of outrage. It has become a global movement with podcasts, YouTube channels, and online communities. The origins of Stoicism reach back to the 4th century before the common era. Zeno was a merchant from a wealthy family who traded an expensive, much sought after purple clothing dye. After losing, very expensive stuff, after losing a shipment of that at sea, he chose to drop out of that business and follow the path of philosophy and developed his own school that became very popular. He taught his students on a porch of Stoa. Rather than name his philosophy after himself, we don't call it Zenoism. He chose to call it the equivalent of porch talk. Sadly, none of his original writings have survived to this day. Mostly we have texts from the first century Stoics, some names you might recognize: Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, slave-turned-teacher Epictetus, and Roman politician and tutor influencer Seneca. The Stoics believed that the universe was ordered, reasonable, and followed laws, not the will of a capricious God. They thought that order was utterly systematic. That order they called logic. It provided a unified account of the world, constructed logic, physics, and ethics that aligned with the natural order, formed the source of their virtue ethic. Their ethics center on virtue as the highest good. They also highly value cultivating emotional self-control and rational judgment to attain eudaimonia, or supreme happiness. They avoided destructive passions and emotions. They viewed them as misguided judgments to be mastered. To cultivate eudaimonia, they practiced 4 cardinal virtues in everyday life: prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice, as well as living in accordance with nature. Prudence they define as the ability to govern and discipline oneself using reason. Fortitude as courage with a physical component, such as facing pain, hardship, even death, and with a moral component, highlighting the ability to act ethically in the face of popular opposition, shame, scandal, discouragement, and personal loss. Temperance focuses on moderation, on voluntary self-restraint. This might include moderate consumption of food and drink and restraint of strong negative emotions. Moderation in this case is less self-control of unwise desires and more an expression of wise character development driven by wholesome desires. Practicing virtue is the source of good that will result in the greatest happiness. Other enjoyments, such as good health, wealth, and pleasure, are not bad or good in themselves. Virtue-based happiness is independent of circumstances and resilient to misfortune. Stoics aligned their will with virtue, reason, and nature to harvest the best fruit. Toward that end, Stoics were careful to determine what was within their control and what was not. What they had the power over, they would exercise their will virtuously. What was out of their control, they would let go and experience indifference or apathy. Intense negative emotion about what was outside of one's control leads leads, they thought, to useless suffering. The Stoics were very careful with negative emotions, seeing them as irrational responses to distress, fear, lust, even elation, all arise from misunderstandings of their nature. One should cultivate freedom from anger, envy, and jealousy. Epictetus captured this independence of inner life from outer circumstances, describing the true Stoic as sick and yet happy, in peril and yet happy, dying and yet happy, in exile and happy, in disgrace and happy, submitting to the universe that is a rigidly deterministic single. That interdependence, rather that independence from outer circumstances is a key idea that connects with the core teachings of the Buddha. Epictetus put it this way: within our power, our opinion, aim, desire, aversion, and whatever affairs are our own. Beyond our power, our body, property, reputation, office, and whatever are not properly our own affairs. I hear echoes of this quote of the Buddha's first and second noble truths. The truth of dukkha, the suffering that is beyond our control, like sickness, old age, and death. These are the Stoic sources of dissatisfaction that are not our own affairs. Much suffering that the Buddha described in the first noble truth arises from how we react to dukkha with tanha, the second noble truth. That reactivity has three harmful expressions: craving for what we don't have, rejection of what we do have that we don't want, and ignorance about how to cope effectively. Stoics organize their lives by reason and attribute their suffering to irrational attitudes that parallel ignorance. The core virtue ethic they follow to deal with irrationality is wisdom. Wisdom is the antidote to ignorance in Buddhism. Happiness and adversity, in the Epictetus quote that I just shared with you, indifference to what is not properly our own affairs parallels equanimity. That is the highest attainment of the third noble truth. Both express a freedom from mental suffering that is possible in human form. Here's a translation of a Buddhist text in which the Buddha described a male practitioner with supreme attainment. He does not construct or generate any volition tending toward either existence or non-existence. Since he does not construct or generate any volition tending toward either existence or non-existence, he does not cling to anything in this world. Not clinging, he is not agitated. Not being agitated, he is personally attains Nibbana, the realization of the third noble truth. These are just a couple of the many mutually supportive connections between Stoicism and Buddhism that I found in a couple of interesting academic papers and reflecting on my own experience. There are, of course, contrasts too, as the two develop different parts of the world embedded in different religious and philosophical traditions. Yet, trade between the regions and conquests back and forth suggest more exchange of thought and ideas than we have in historical record. For me, as the world hopefully begins to turn away from supporting human happiness through the destruction of our planet, I appreciate finding examples from different religious, philosophical, and secular cultures of non-materialistic practices that support human flourishing. To stop the capitalistic exploitation of the global South, to provide luxury goods to stimulate the global North's pleasure receptors. How wonderful. To find practices and values that bring happiness independent of consuming and accumulating more stuff. This is also a validation of our Unitarian Universalist pluralistic approach to religion, values, and philosophy. We do not all have to practice one belief system or read only one religious text. A Stoic and a Buddhist in a UU congregation can find common ground and common values that are mutually reinforcing. And they will find common ground and values with those with Christian and Jewish values too. Both Stoicism and Christianity emphasize moral living and self-mastery. The Stoic virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control find echoes in Christian virtues such as love, passion, humility, and forgiveness. Stoicism and Jewish teachings emphasize self-restraint, duty, and ethical living. Some of the later rabbinical literature contains parallels to Stoic practices. For Unitarian Universalists, we cherish the wisdom of the world and teachings where we find common ground and common values. In that spirit, I brought the Stoics to you today and shared a little bit of their philosophy. If they resonate with you and there's interest, maybe we can do a little study with them together. What do you think, Zach? Sounds good to Zach. All right, well, we'll do something on Thursdays. Otherwise, whether you want to do that or not, let us celebrate the freedom we have as Unitarian Universalists to seek truth and meaning from whatever inspires us and leads us to that truth that we find. And in that search, may we discover ways to free ourselves from exploiting the earth and finding enduring happiness. So be it.